Hey everybody. So it's Thursday night. I'm hoping you guys did well on your test this afternoon. Um, and now we're going to go ahead and be starting a new unit here. So we're going to be looking at absolute values. We're going to be looking at absolute value equations as well as absolute value inequalities. And we're going to be taking these, we're going to be starting basic with equations, and we're going to build up on equations, and then we'll go to inequalities, and we'll start basic with inequalities and kind of build up on those as well. So tonight we're going to be talking about absolute value equations, and I'm just calling them 1 and 2 step equations because they're kind of like solving a 1 and a 2 step equation. So something that you guys haven't had before just because it hasn't come up, but I will occasionally put up some vocab words on here, and they will show up on quizzes, as well as tests occasionally. So the first vocab word is an absolute value. I want to know exactly what an absolute value is by definition. So I want you guys to look that up, and that needs to be included in your notes. Also remember, as you're doing your notes, you need to be putting steps down so that you guys have something to work off from when you're looking at your notes and you're doing your worksheets. So let's go ahead and get started. Example number 1. Example number 1 is just a basic absolute value problem, and it's the absolute value of x equals 4. Now, absolute values, we know, and my little board shut off, so hold on, let me get this back up and running. An absolute value, we know, what it means is that you make whatever number is inside here becomes positive, okay? So that means that I know that, like for example, I know that for absolute value of 4 equals 4 because the absolute value of 4 is 4. But I also know that if I put negative 4 in here, the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4. Okay? So for an easy problem like this, I'm going to show you in terms of x. So now I can say the absolute value of x is 4, and the absolute value of negative x is also equal to 4. Okay? So now I have two equations. Now this is going to be the explanation of why you do what you do. Okay? And then I'm going to just show you a generalized rule that you can remember when you're doing these. The absolute value of x equals 4. Alright? So now I'm just going to get rid of the absolute values. So I have x equals 4, or I also have that negative x equals 4. Well, the problem is that I'm looking for the value of x. Well, here I have the value of x. I have that x equals 4. But in the second equation, I have that negative x equals 4. So now I have to solve for x, and I'm going to divide everything by 1, which will give me that x equals negative 4. So here are my two, here's my answer then. I got x equals 4, or x equals negative 4. Okay, so this is your answer. I've also seen it written like this, which would be fine. X equals plus or minus 4. Either one of those would be perfectly okay. Now, here is the rule of thumb. And here is the generalized rule that you can use to where you don't have to do this solving part right here. When you have something like the absolute value of x equals 4, you're going to make two equations. Both equations start the exact same way. The left side is always the same. X equals x equals. The right side, the first one is 4. The second one is the opposite, negative 4. And this would give me my answer. Now, this is an or statement because x cannot equal 4 and negative 4 at the same time. So it's x equals 4 or x equals negative 4. Okay, now let's take this concept and let's move it over to another problem that's a little more difficult. Okay, now, whenever you're doing absolute values, you always want to check, do I have anything outside? Okay, it's kind of like, you can think of it like this. If I have 2 times x plus 3 minus 2 equals 4, I always start when I solve by getting rid of the minus 2 first. Okay, I'm going to save the parentheses for last. Alright, So it's the same idea here. I need to make sure, is there anything outside the absolute values, because if there is, I have to get the absolute values by themselves before I can make two equations. Alright, so you cannot make two equations unless the absolute value is by itself. That is when I'm going to get rid of the absolute value signs. So my first equation, again, they both start the same way. X plus 2 and x plus 2 equals. The first one is the same number that's here, 4. The second one is the opposite, negative 4. So now I have my two equations. Now you're going to solve for the variables. Minus 2, and you get x equals 2. And here you're going to subtract 2 and subtract 2, and you get x equals negative 6. So it's x equals 2 or x equals negative 6. Now, I'm going to show you a common misconception, so this is what you don't do. Okay? You have the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 4. Subtract 2. You get the absolute value of x equals 2, which means that x equals 2 or x equals negative 2. This is incorrect. Okay? You have to get the absolute value by itself. Once you do that, you do not take anything out of the absolute value. You make your two equations, just like we did up here. Then I can get rid of the 2 that's inside the absolute value. Okay? Now let's go on to example number 3. Example number 3, you see that we have stuff outside the absolute value, and there happens to be on this one nothing inside. You can have problems where there is something inside, but for this example, and this is actually example number 3, for this example, there is nothing inside. So now what you're going to do is I have to get rid of the stuff outside first. So I'm going to start by adding 2 to both sides. This gives me 2 times the absolute value of x equals 6. Now I'm going to divide by 2, and I get the absolute value of x equals 3. Now I can make my two equations. There is nothing left outside. So I say x equals 3 or x equals, notice the left sides are still the same. The right side on this one will be the opposite. And that gives me my answer of x equals 3 or x equals negative 3. Okay? So remember, do not make your two equations and get rid of the absolute values until the absolute value is isolated and there's nothing outside the absolute value. You can have stuff inside, just not outside. Okay? Alright guys, hopefully you guys will come tomorrow prepared to work on this stuff in class, and hopefully you're understanding it. If you do have questions, you need to ask me at the beginning of class, and we'll work on this stuff tomorrow. This is also going to take us into more advanced stuff on Friday for this weekend, so make sure you're prepared. Alright, have a great night, and I will see you guys tomorrow.